The last night at the lake, the last days of August, always carried a strange weight in the air, like the season itself was holding its breath before fading into autumn. For 19-year-old Claire, the lake house was a final escape before returning to the monotony of classes and responsibilities. She had spent every summer there since she was a child, and though most of her friends had grown out of the tradition, she felt a deep pull to the place. The cabin sat at the edge of Black Pine Lake, isolated and quiet, surrounded by tall evergreens that seemed to whisper when the wind moved through them. That night, she arrived alone, her parents having left earlier in the week, leaving her with the silence and the water. Claire unpacked slowly, stretching the moment, letting the creaks of the wooden floorboards and the faint hum of cicadas sink in. There was something comforting about the solitude. No phones buzzing, no obligations. Just the faint shimmer of the lake through the window and the smell of damp pine needles drifting in. She decided to take one last swim before nightfall, slipping into the darkening water, feeling it close around her like cool silk. As she floated, the world felt heavy with memory. Summers spent with friends splashing, her father teaching her how to fish, her mother humming softly on the porch swing. But that nostalgia carried a strange chill now, as though the water itself remembered more than it should. When she came up for air, she thought she saw something. Just past the dock, further into the deep where the water turned black, a ripple broke the otherwise still surface. She treaded water, squinting. A log, maybe. A fish. That's what she told herself, though her body reacted differently. Her muscles stiffening, her breathing quickening, as if some hidden instinct warned her. She swam back to shore quickly, feeling a tightness in her chest, and told herself it was just nerves. After all, it was the last night of summer. The season's end had always made her feel uneasy, though she never knew why. Back inside the cabin, she tried to shake the feeling. She lit a single lamp, casting a golden glow across the old wood walls. Outside, the lake was a black mirror, reflecting only the faintest slice of moon. Claire sat by the window, watching the still water, trying to convince herself she had imagined the disturbance. But the longer she stared, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. The lake wasn't still anymore. It was breathing, subtle ripples spreading out, as if something beneath the surface was moving closer and closer to the shore. She shut the curtains quickly, heart thudding. "It's just a fish," she whispered, trying to steady herself. Yet even as she said it, she felt the old cabin shift slightly, the way it always did when someone heavy walked across the porch. Except she knew she had locked the door. Except she knew she was alone. The night suddenly felt too long, too wide, and far too quiet. She told herself she'd sleep it off, but deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning, that the end of summer would not let her leave so easily. Knocks on the water. Claire woke with a start. At first, she thought it was a dream, some lingering fragment that had jolted her awake. The lamp she had left on was still glowing weakly, though its light seemed dimmer now, more suffocated by the shadows pressing in from the corners of the cabin. She sat up slowly, listening. The sound that had disturbed her came again, a thunk, hollow and rhythmic, like wood striking wood. It echoed faintly through the night. Her eyes darted to the window, but the curtains were drawn tight. She crept toward the sound, each step creaking under her bare feet. It wasn't coming from the porch after all. It was coming from the lake. The knocks had a strange cadence to them. 1, pause. 2, pause. Then 3 in quick succession. Claire froze. It wasn't random, not like branches hitting the dock in the wind. It was deliberate. She pressed her ear against the door, heart pounding, and could swear she heard something else under the knocking. A faint slosh, like heavy arms moving through the water. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. The night air slapped against her skin, cool and sharp. The dock stretched into the lake like a dark finger, and at the very end of it, she saw the source of the sound. A piece of driftwood was bobbing against the dock's posts, bumping in the current. She exhaled, a laugh catching in her throat, almost relieved. But then she noticed it wasn't moving with the current at all. The water was nearly still, yet the log kept striking the wood in the same unnerving pattern. 1, pause. 2, pause. 3. Almost like knocking. Almost like a signal. That Claire's eyes adjusted to the darkness, and she saw something else. The log wasn't just driftwood. Its surface was covered in deep grooves, strange symmetrical lines that reminded her of carvings. She felt a wave of dizziness at the sight of them, shapes that seemed almost too deliberate, too ancient to be accidental. And then the water stirred again, wider ripples rolling out from beneath the dock, as though something large had shifted just below. Claire stepped back, stumbling into the doorway, the air in her lungs sharp and shallow. She slammed the door and locked it, pressing her back against the wood as though her body alone could hold back the night. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder, faster now, as though whatever was in the water knew she had seen. The rhythm was no longer slow. It was urgent, frantic, demanding her attention. Claire curled into herself, whispering prayers she hadn't spoken since childhood. She didn't know why, but a thought pressed into her mind with terrifying clarity. This wasn't the first time someone had heard those knocks, and maybe not everyone had made it home when summer ended. The face beneath the knocking finally stopped, though the silence it left behind felt even worse. Claire sat in the middle of the cabin floor, hugging her knees, listening to every creak and groan of the house, as though it might reveal some hidden intruder. She considered leaving, driving into town, abandoning the lake house altogether, but her car was parked down the narrow dirt path near the tree line, and the thought of walking through that darkness alone felt unbearable. Besides, she told herself, it was just wood on the water. Strange, yes, but explainable. Hours crawled by. The lamp flickered, straining against the heavy dark pressing at the windows. Claire couldn't stand sitting still anymore. She needed proof, something to convince her that it had only been her nerves twisting the night into terror. With shaky resolve, she pulled the curtains open just a sliver and peered out. The lake glistened under the moonlight, deceptively calm. The dock stretched long and empty, no driftwood, no ripples. Just water, flat as glass. For a brief moment, relief washed over her. She even managed a weak smile, but then she saw it. Not on the dock, not in the trees, but beneath the water. A pale shape floated just under the surface, directly in front of the cabin. Her breath caught as her eyes adjusted. It was a face, or at least, it looked like one, smooth and ghostly, with dark hollows where the eyes should have been. It was staring up at her, unblinking, motionless. Claire stumbled back from the window so fast she knocked the lamp over, plunging the cabin into darkness. The glass shattered against the floor, but she didn't dare move. The silence returned, heavier than before, thick enough to smother. Then came a sound, soft at first, like a hand brushing along the wood of the dock. Swish, scrape, swish. It grew louder, closer, until it was right outside the cabin wall. Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, tears welling in her eyes, her body frozen in terror. Whatever was outside wasn't trying to hide anymore. It wanted her to hear it. It wanted her to know it was there. Suddenly, a heavy thud struck the wall, shaking the whole frame of the cabin. Once, twice, then silence again. Claire's heart raced so hard it hurt, every nerve in her body screaming to run, but her legs wouldn't move. The lake had always been her safe place, her home in the summers. Now it felt alive, aware, and hateful. And it wasn't just watching her from the water anymore. It was coming closer. Wet footsteps. Claire sat in the dark, her palms sweating against the floorboards, her body straining to hear. The silence that followed the thud was unbearable, stretching out until every second felt like a rope tightening around her throat. She tried to convince herself it was just the lake's shifting currents or the wind pushing something against the cabin, but she knew better. There had been weight behind that impact, deliberate, forceful, alive. Then she heard it. The sound she had dreaded most. Step. A slow, wet step against the wooden porch. She froze, breath caught in her chest, her mind screaming denial. Step, step. The weight was heavy, too heavy for dripping branches or animals. The wood groaned beneath each press, and with every step, the cabin seemed to shrink, its walls bending inward under the weight of what stalked her. The footsteps stopped at the door. For a moment, all was still. Claire's eyes darted to the lock. A single flimsy chain and bolt. Her father had promised to fix it years ago, but never did. Now it was the only thing separating her from whatever stood outside. She covered her mouth with both hands as the doorknob twitched. Once, twice, then slowly turned, clicking softly, testing. Her stomach dropped. The lock rattled against the force behind it. She couldn't see what was on the other side, but she could hear it breathing, long, labored draws of air, like lungs filled with water. The knob stopped turning. For a long, unbearable moment, the thing outside simply waited. Claire could picture it, pale, dripping, standing inches away, head tilted toward the thin barrier of wood. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body refused. Then came the sound that broke her composure completely, the lock clicking back into place. Not from her, not from safety. From it. The thing had let go, deliberately, as though mocking her. And then came the footsteps again, slow and dragging, moving away from the door and toward the windows. The wet prints spread along the porch, circling the cabin, testing every wall. Claire clutched herself tighter, rocking slightly, praying the boards would hold. But she already knew the truth. This thing wasn't trying to break in tonight. It was studying her, learning her boundaries. And when it finally decided to come inside, no lock or wall would keep it out. Something in the window Claire hadn't moved in what felt like hours. Her body was stiff, her breathing shallow, her ears tuned to every scrape and whisper outside the walls. The wet footsteps had circled the cabin twice before fading, swallowed by the heavy quiet of the forest and the lake. She told herself it was gone, that maybe it had retreated back to the water. But she couldn't convince herself, not when the air still smelled faintly of brine, not when the boards beneath her felt damp, as though the thing had left its moisture inside the house. She finally summoned the courage to light a candle. The tiny flames sputtered in her trembling hands before catching, throwing long shadows across the cabin's interior. The weak light did little to ease her dread. If anything, it made the room look stranger, objects she knew by heart stretching tall and crooked, the shadows bending unnaturally, almost as if they were leaning toward her. She told herself not to look at the window, but her eyes betrayed her. Something was there. First it seemed like a reflection, a trick of the candlelight against the glass. But no, the shape was outside, pressed against the window pane. A pale hand, splayed wide, its fingers long, too long, tapering into points that left streaks of water against the glass. Claire's stomach lurched as she followed the arm up to a blurred outline of a face. The hollow sockets she had seen beneath the water were clearer now. Pressed so close, she could see the faint texture of skin stretched too tight, like something that had been drowned and left too long beneath the surface. Its mouth was wrong, wider than it should be, split into a thin, jagged smile. Claire stumbled backward, the candle nearly toppling from her grip. The figure didn't move, didn't blink. It only pressed closer, its breath fogging the glass in long, deliberate bursts. She wanted to run, but her body betrayed her again, locking her in place. The creature's head tilted slightly, curiously, like a predator studying prey. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it sank back into the dark, peeling away from the window until only the reflection of the candle remained. Her knees buckled, and she dropped to the floor, the flame shivering dangerously close to going out. She didn't know how much longer she could last. Every instinct screamed that the lake wanted her, that the thing she had seen was only part of something larger, something patient. And with every tick of the clock, the summer night stretched longer, as though dawn might never come. When the walls breathed, the dresser shuddered against the bedroom door as unseen weight pressed from the other side. Each slam rattled the floorboards, sending dust drifting from the ceiling. Saad sobbed into his pillow, whispering prayers so fast they blurred together. Nadia clutched the journal, her eyes scanning every frantic line, searching for something, anything, that might tell her how to stop this nightmare. The words leapt out at her. The walls are its lungs. When the house breathes, you are already inside it. Her stomach lurched. It wasn't just their prison. They were part of it now. The air grew unbearably thick, like they were trapped in a furnace. The walls around them swelled and contracted, groaning with each unnatural breath. Plaster cracked, sending fine white dust into the air. The wallpaper bulged outward as if something were pushing from the inside, straining to get through. A long fissure tore across the ceiling, and through it came a sound, a low, guttural moan that reverberated through their bones. Nadia covered Saad's ears, but she couldn't protect him from the feeling of it crawling under their skin. Then the whispers stopped. Silence crashed over them, heavier than the noise had ever been. The door handle ceased rattling. The banging ceased, and for one terrifying moment Nadia thought it might all be over. She dared to move closer to the dresser, pressing her ear to the wood. Nothing. No breath. No whispers. But then came the slow scrape of something enormous moving inside the walls, circling the room like a predator stalking its prey. Saad's wide eyes followed the sound as the plaster bulged inward, forming the faint outline of a hand, then a face pressing through, features stretched and distorted. With a choked cry, Nadia grabbed the journal and flipped frantically through the last pages. The final entry wasn't a warning, it was a ritual, written in her grandmother's desperate scrawl. It detailed a way to confront the entity. Blood binds it. The blood of the house is the key. Cut it, mark it, command it. Nadia's hands shook violently. She didn't understand what it meant, but it was the only hope they had. She tore the page free, clutching it like a lifeline as the wall cracked open, plaster splintering outward. A long, skeletal arm pushed through the wall, black and glistening like tar. Its claws scraped against the dresser, pulling it aside with ease. The door groaned as if bowing to its master, and then, slowly, deliberately, it began to swing open. The thing in the hallway no longer hid in shadow. It was here, inside, and it was coming for them. The thing that crawled in the crack in the floorboards widened with a splintering snap, spraying icy water across the cabin. Claire stumbled back, clutching the candle like a weapon, though she knew it was useless. Her mind screamed for escape, but her legs refused to obey as she watched the boards buckle and bow, each creak louder than the last. Then, through the widening split, a pale hand shot upward, long fingers clawing at the air, dripping lake water onto the floor. Claire screamed, dropping the candle. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the faint moonlight spilling through the curtains. She scrambled backward, her palms slipping on the wet boards, as another hand burst through the floor beside the first. They gripped the wood with unnatural strength, dragging something enormous upward. The sound was unbearable, bones grinding, water gushing, wood splintering under impossible weight. The stench of rot and brine filled the cabin, choking her with every breath. The head emerged next, slick and pale, with hollow sockets fixed toward her. Water poured from its open mouth in a steady stream, flooding the boards. Its body was too large for the crawl space, yet it forced its way through with jerking, grotesque movements, bending in ways a human body never could. Claire's mind snapped between denial and horror. It was real. The face she had seen beneath the water was no hallucination. It was here, inside her safe place, and it was hungry. Adrenaline finally took hold. Claire bolted for the door, yanking the lock free with trembling hands. She crashed onto the porch, bare feet slapping against the soaked boards, and ran. The forest loomed ahead, its shadows deep and endless, but it was her only chance. Behind her, the cabin groaned as though collapsing under the thing's weight. She didn't dare look back. Every step into the trees felt like wading through a nightmare. But then she realized the forest wasn't silent. A faint dripping sound followed her, echoing through the pines. She turned, heart hammering, and froze. Between the trees, water glistened where it shouldn't have, beads forming on bark, damp mist curling along the ground. The lake wasn't behind her anymore. Somehow, impossibly, it had followed. The air smelled of algae and decay, even this far from the shore. And in the distance, through the shifting shadows, she saw movement. Multiple shapes, pale and tall, gliding between the trees as though the forest itself had become another shore. The drowned ones. Claire ran until her lungs burned, the damp forest pressing close around her. Every branch she snapped underfoot felt like a flare announcing her location, every ragged breath like a beacon. Behind her, the dripping grew louder, closer, punctuated by the soft drag of limbs through wet earth. She glanced over her shoulder just once and saw a pale figure sliding between the trees, its elongated arms swaying unnaturally. Her scream lodged in her throat. She couldn't outrun them forever. Through the tangle of roots and undergrowth, her foot struck something solid. She stumbled, crashing hard against the ground. When she pushed herself up, her fingers brushed not soil but stone, a marker weathered and half swallowed by moss. As her eyes adjusted, she realized she had stumbled into an old clearing, its edges lined with crude gravestones. Dozens of them, names carved shallowly, many worn smooth, others still legible beneath the grime. The candle of memory flickered in her mind, her grandfather's journal, the warnings, the knocking at summer's end. She leaned closer to one of the stones, her chest heaving. It bore the name of a boy she vaguely remembered her parents mentioning, someone from the lake community who had drowned years before she was born. Another stone nearby bore the name of a woman who had vanished while swimming. The stories came back in fragments, always whispered, always softened into accidents. But here they all were, memorialized together, hidden in the woods. A graveyard of the drowned. The ground beneath her hands felt damp, seeping through her skin. She looked down and saw water pooling between the stones, shallow at first but spreading quickly. Ripples rolled outward, forming small black mirrors that reflected the moonlight. And in those reflections, the faces appeared, hollow-eyed, slack-jawed, staring up at her from beneath the surface. The same faces she'd seen at the lake. The drowned weren't resting here. They were waiting that a sharp crack behind her snapped her head around. One of the pale figures had entered the clearing. Its long body leaned unnaturally, head cocked, sockets fixed on her. Another figure appeared at the tree line, then another. They were converging, closing the circle around her. Claire scrambled to her feet, heart in her throat, as she realized the truth. These weren't random spirits. They were taken every summer, dragged into the lake, trapped until the season ended. And now, at summer's dying breath, they were hunting for another to join them. The circle of stones, the clearing seemed to shrink as the pale figures moved closer, their limbs dragging in grotesque rhythm, the sound of water dripping from their bodies filling the night. Claire stumbled backward between the crooked gravestones, her breath ragged, her body trembling with exhaustion. She could barely think, her mind a blur of panic and disbelief. But instinct screamed that if she didn't act, the circle would close and she'd vanish like the others. Her foot struck against something buried in the moss. She bent quickly, desperate, her fingers scraping cold stone. Not another grave marker. This was different. A flat, round slab, its surface etched with strange grooves. At first, she thought it was just erosion, but the longer she looked, the more deliberate it seemed. Patterns carved in concentric circles, intersecting lines that pulsed faintly in the moonlight as if alive. Her grandfather's journal flashed in her mind. They wait beneath. Don't answer it. But what if this wasn't a warning? What if it was a map? Or a ward? The creatures drew closer. Their faces sagged and distorted as they moved, mouths opening in silent gasps, hollow sockets locked onto her. One reached out with a dripping hand, its fingers curling like hooks. Claire pressed her palm against the slab instinctively, half praying, half pleading. The stone was icy, the carvings cutting into her skin, but the figures halted. Just for a moment. The entire clearing seemed to pause, the water pooling between the graves rippling outward in perfect circles. Her heart thundered. The slab, whatever it was, meant something to them. It wasn't fear exactly, but recognition. She pressed harder, whispering nonsense words, anything that felt like a prayer. The pale figures swayed, their heads tilting, as though listening. The water rose higher now, creeping over her ankles, swallowing the graves. Faces floated just below the surface, dozens of them, their mouths opening and closing as though chanting in unison. The sound wasn't in the air but in her skull, a dull, rhythmic pulse, echoing the old knocks from the dock. The figures began to move again, faster now, more urgent. Claire realized with a stab of terror that the slab wasn't a shield. It was a doorway, and by touching it, by answering it, she had called them closer. She staggered back, hearts slamming, the creatures nearly upon her. The drowned wanted her, and now they had no reason to wait for dawn. The last night at the lake, the last days of August, always carried a strange weight in the air, like the season itself was holding its breath before fading into autumn. For 19-year-old Claire, the lake house was a final escape before returning to the monotony of classes and responsibilities. She had spent every summer there since she was a child, and though most of her friends had grown out of the tradition, she felt a deep pull to the place. The cabin sat at the edge of Black Pine Lake, isolated and quiet, surrounded by tall evergreens that seemed to whisper when the wind moved through them. That night, she arrived alone, her parents having left earlier in the week, leaving her with the silence and the water. Claire unpacked slowly, stretching the moment, letting the creaks of the wooden floorboards and the faint hum of cicadas sink in. There was something comforting about the solitude. No phones buzzing, no obligations. Just the faint shimmer of the lake through the window and the smell of damp pine needles drifting in. She decided to take one last swim before nightfall, slipping into the darkening water, feeling it close around her like cool silk. As she floated, the world felt heavy with memory. Summers spent with friends splashing, her father teaching her how to fish, her mother humming softly on the porch swing. But that nostalgia carried a strange chill now, as though the water itself remembered more than it should. When she came up for air, she thought she saw something. Just past the dock, further into the deep where the water turned black, a ripple broke the otherwise still surface. She treaded water, squinting. A log, maybe. A fish. That's what she told herself, though her body reacted differently. Her muscles stiffening, her breathing quickening, as if some hidden instinct warned her. She swam back to shore quickly, feeling a tightness in her chest, and told herself it was just nerves. After all, it was the last night of summer. The season's end had always made her feel uneasy, though she never knew why. Back inside the cabin, she tried to shake the feeling. She lit a single lamp, casting a golden glow across the old wood walls. Outside, the lake was a black mirror, reflecting only the faintest slice of moon. Claire sat by the window, watching the still water, trying to convince herself she had imagined the disturbance. But the longer she stared, the more convinced she became that something was wrong. The lake wasn't still anymore. It was breathing, subtle ripples spreading out, as if something beneath the surface was moving closer and closer to the shore. She shut the curtains quickly, heart thudding. "It's just a fish," she whispered, trying to steady herself. Yet even as she said it, she felt the old cabin shift slightly, the way it always did when someone heavy walked across the porch. Except she knew she had locked the door. Except she knew she was alone. The night suddenly felt too long, too wide, and far too quiet. She told herself she'd sleep it off, but deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning, that the end of summer would not let her leave so easily.